Good afternoon, or good morning, depending on where you're joining from, and welcome. I'm super thrilled to be able to open up this landscape conservation in action webinar today, and super excited that we have a chance today to connect with and learn more about some really innovative, collaborative, inspiring work happening in Mexico and the American Southwest around agave restoration and the impacts of that on biodiversity and human well-being. So really pleased to be able to have this conversation space today. And thank you so much for carving out some time to join. My name is John Peterson. I'm the director for the Network for Landscape Conservation. And I'm joining from Western Massachusetts, and I have a smile on my face because it is an absolutely picture perfect spring day here today. Brilliant sunshine, and temperatures pushing upwards towards 70, and that fresh bright green on leaves again, which is um, just really buoys the spirits. And I hope wherever you are, you too are finding those moments to get outside and to connect with the places that you cherish. And that amidst so much uncertainty and change and disruption right now, that you're finding those moments to be nourished by the landscapes that you care about. Um, as we get started, I just wanted to again offer a welcome from the Network for Landscape Conservation. The network was formed in 2011, and it really is that national umbrella group and leading voice for collaborative landscape conservation and stewardship. Our work, we really focus on connecting people to ideas and innovations, and to one another. And it's really that last point that really resonates most deeply with me. And I think of the network most as not as an entity or organization, but really rather as a community. And it's a community that's connected by our shared work of caring for the places and people that are so meaningful to us, and by a shared commitment to see that work done better. Um, and it's out of that sort of context that our webinar series emerges. And our hope is that by convening these webinars, we have a chance to really harvest and elevate insights and ideas around sort of the how-to of collaborative landscape conservation and stewardship, and to really create those opportunities for learning, for exchange, for dialogue amongst practitioners in this space throughout North America, so that we can do our work more effectively and with greater impact and collectively advance our field of practice. I'm really super excited today to be joined by Dr. Kristen Lear, um, who is the Agave Restoration Program Director. Welcome, Kristen, for Bat Conservation International. And I'm going to let Kristen provide a much richer and fuller introduction of herself as she gets started. And I want to turn to that really quickly, but just a word from my vantage point as we move into this webinar and this conversation. Part of what I really find so compelling about the work that Kristen and colleagues are doing in Mexico and the American Southwest, um, is that it really recognizes the interconnectedness and interdependencies of the world. And I think what we'll find today as we learn more about the work that Kristen and colleagues are doing is that the agave restoration initiatives efforts really are framed in such a way to support rural livelihood and well-being. And that's not as a separate sort of ancillary benefit, but as really an integral foundational strategy to their work in advancing biodiversity outcomes. And so I think the work is premised so deeply in this notion that our socio-cultural systems are really inextricably linked to our biodiverse or biophysical systems. And that's a really compelling space to explore and reflect on. And I'm excited to have the opportunity to move in that space and think and reflect on that as we think about collaborative landscape conservation and stewardship. And so with that, I want to invite Kristen to take us away and lead us into the conversation. As we do so, I would just the last note is just please, we hope that this is a dialogue and conversation. So please, as Kristen moves through her slides and shares her thoughts and reflections, please make use of the chat and share your own reflections and comments and questions. And I think Kristen, I think we're planning on 15 or 20 minutes at the end to have for questions. So I'm super excited to have that space too. But anyway, enough from me. Kristen, it's really, really wonderful to have you joining us today. And I'm super excited to turn it over to you and let you lead us into this conversation.
Thank you, John. I am very excited to be here. This is work that I am very passionate about and is very near and dear to my heart. Having gotten started in conservation of nectar feeding bats through my PhD work, and now working at Bat Conservation International, leading our agave restoration initiative for these pollinating nectar bats. So I'm very excited to share about the initiative. I'm going to share some of the kind of bigger picture insights that we've learned over the years, as well as some kind of more nitty-gritty practical recommendations. I know I love to kind of hear how other people are doing things and ideas from others. So I hope this provides a good platform to have those conversations. And then at the end, there's some challenges that we face that I'll share a little bit about. And I would love to have some dialogue at the end where we can share about your work and how you're approaching things, so we can build this community of practice even stronger. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing. Let me get that pulled up. Okay. Is that showing? I think we're good.
I'm not seeing anything, Kristen. Do you
Oh
want to
no.
try again? Sorry.
Yeah, let
Maybe
me try. 1 second. Oh no, you're good.
I'm seeing that now, Kristen. You're good to go.
Perfect.
Yeah,
Awesome.
thank you.
Yep, thank you. So yeah, welcome to the world of bats and agaves. We here at Bat Conservation International have been leading our agave restoration initiative since 2018. It has morphed from a small, localized, set of pilot projects in the Southwest US to now a binational landscape scale initiative across 9 US and Mexican states. So I want to share again how kind of the journey we've taken to get here and some of those insights and practical recommendations for landscape scale conservation efforts. So Bat Conservation International we are a nonprofit. We work around the world to end bat extinctions. That is our mission. We work pretty much everywhere in the world with local partners, with many different endangered species, as well as locally in the US to restore habitats, to protect bat roosts, and to work with communities to engage in community roost protection and foraging habitat restoration. So when we're talking about our agave restoration initiative, this is one of our flagship programs here at BCI. And it is focused on these 3 species of nectar-feeding bats that migrate between the Southwest United States and Mexico every year. These are the 3 species: the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat, which is endangered in the US and internationally by the IUCN. The lesser long-nosed bat was actually delisted in 2018 in the US, which is really exciting kind of success story. But it is still listed internationally as near threatened by the IUCN. And then the Mexican long-tongued bat is also near threatened by the IUCN. So these bats are long-distance migrators. This map here shows the range areas in yellow and purple of the Mexican long-nosed and lesser long-nosed bats. They're migrating every year between central and southern Mexico, all the way to northern Mexico and the Southwest United States. It is an over 750-mile migration. which is pretty spectacular on its own. But another crazy aspect of the spectacularness is that this is undergone by mostly the pregnant females while they are pregnant. So you can imagine it is a very arduous journey for these mother bats. And during that long distance migration, these bats are relying on the nectar of agave plants as well as columnar cacti in some areas. And in turn, these agaves, these plants, are pollinated by the bats. You can see they shove their tongues deep inside these flowers. They get covered in pollen. They spread that pollen over large distances and help maintain genetic diversity of agave and other plant populations. And when we're talking about agaves, agaves are critical for these mother bats, particularly in northeast Mexico and the southwest United States, where the Mexican long-nosed bat, the endangered species, only feeds on agave plants in those areas. There are no other known nectar sources, natural nectar sources for these bats in those areas. And so agaves are critical to help maintain these bat populations. And agave plants, I'm sure we know of the most kind of popular human use of agaves, tequila and mezcal. Agaves are these very important cultural and economic resources for people. You know, we make agave syrup, we make tequila, mezcal, we make all these products for sale to support local economies. Agave plants, the stalks are used to build fences and houses in Mexico. The parts of the agaves, the leaves and the stalks, are provided to cattle and goats as fodder. And then the whole plant themselves are planted as living fences to delineate property boundaries and also to help control erosion. So these plants are very important resources for people as well as bats. And I love these pictures because agaves themselves are just iconic parts of the landscapes where they are found. They are beautiful plants, deserving of conservation on their own. They're just these iconic parts of their ecosystems. Now, unfortunately, like many habitats around the world, agave habitat is facing loss and fragmentation across that 750-mile migratory corridor. So more and more, we're seeing landscapes that look like this. This is one of our sites in northeast Mexico, where degraded land, degraded soils, barren areas, basically denuded of the native vegetation, have erosion control issues. There's many reasons for this. Agriculture expansion, unsustainable grazing is a big thing in both countries. Climate change and drought. All of these factors are leading to landscapes that look more and more like this. And this has caused population declines of these bats. So much so that the Mexican long-nosed bat, the population has declined by about 50% estimated over the past several decades, in part due to loss and fragmentation of this agave habitat. And when we think about the people that are using these agaves, the loss of this agave habitat and these healthy plants also threatens their livelihoods, especially for those people who are deriving agave products or using those agaves to sustain their livestock, for example. So this issue is threatening both bats and people. But what if we could take landscapes that look like this and turn them into landscapes that look like this, with healthy soils, healthy native vegetation, and of course, these beautiful blooming agaves that support both the bats and the people who want to use agaves. That is the goal of the Agave Restoration Initiative. We're working across that migratory landscape to restore healthy agave populations across that whole corridor for both bats and for people. And our vision is to create this binational migratory corridor that is safeguarded by community-based conservation in each of the areas where we work. So these red stars are the locations where we're currently working, and we currently have activities happening through the initiative. So you can see it's quite a large scale, currently working in 9 US and Mexican states. And don't get caught up in all these logos, but I wanted to show just the breadth of partners that we have. We are currently working with over 65 multi-sectoral partners, including local communities, the ejidos in Mexico, private landowners and ranchers, of course, local NGOs, government agencies, industry, researchers. It runs the gamut. It's a very, very collaborative effort. And the work that we're doing really works at the intersection of wildlife conservation, land restoration, and rural economic development. And I'll talk more about what this looks like, but like John said, the work that we're doing, it's of course about the bats from our perspective. That's where we're coming to the problem from, is the bat perspective, but it's much more than just bats. And our goal in terms of, our priorities, our 2035 goals, those 10-year goals from now, is making sure we're protecting the roost sites for these bats. Of course, they need good spots to migrate through and to have their babies. So we're making sure we're protecting those roost areas. And we're also, of course, restoring the degraded landscape. So our goal is to plant at least 500,000 native agaves across 9 US, Mexican, and US states. And then not just planting agaves, but making sure the land is healthy, the soil is healthy, and can support those agaves long term. So our goal is to restore or protect 193,000 acres across that corridor through various mechanisms. And then in terms of people, this work cannot happen without people and without committed support and committed actions from the people. And so we're working to support community and private nurseries across that area to grow out agaves for restoration and support local community needs. 20 nurseries, we've actually surpassed that goal already, so that's pretty exciting. And then providing training in regenerative agriculture and ranching to at least 500 community members, again, to ensure those long-term conditions maintain long-term. And then economic and cultural benefit, we're currently working with or have plans to work with 50 communities across the US and Mexico, and supporting at least 200 families with diversified income opportunities through restoration activities. So I want to talk a little bit about our impact to date and what we've done in terms of those restoration goals. So across that binational corridor, we have collected over 1 million native agave seeds. These are some pictures of agave seed collection. It's quite a fun activity. And yeah, we've collected these seeds both for propagation for our restoration efforts, as well as to provide seeds for regional seed banks to, again, maintain that agave diversity long-term in those seed banks. We're working to grow those native agaves with our local native plant nurseries that are both private nurseries as well as community-owned nurseries with the communities. And we are currently supporting, we've either built or are maintaining 26 of these greenhouses, and we have currently growing 225,000 agaves that are in production across those nurseries. So we have 225,000 agaves currently growing that we'll be planting in the next several years. And then, like I said, planting agaves is kind of the crux of the initiative, making sure we're restoring those agave populations in these key bat areas. And so far, we've planted over 116,000 agaves across 7 US and Mexican states. So we've really ramped up over the past few years, which I will share about how we got there from planting a few hundred agaves here and there to thousands of agaves across that corridor. And then, like I mentioned, this work is much more holistic than just putting agaves in the ground. We need to make sure that the conditions are there in the soil, the native vegetation, those nurse plants for the agaves, that they're there and healthy so that those agaves can thrive long term. So we work with our local NGO partners to work with landowners and communities to implement regenerative grazing practices and soil and water restoration techniques on their farms or on their community lands. And then with those partners, we've restored over 4,600 hectares protected from mostly from livestock, the cattle that go in and eat the agaves or denude the surface of the vegetation. And then we're working on restoring those 827 hectares restored with those regenerative practices and soil and water conservation techniques. This number is from our past couple years. This number is continuing to grow. So how have we scaled from pilot projects to a large landscape scale initiative? It obviously did not start at that whole scale. So stepping back, when we talk about long distance migratory species like these bats, successful conservation of these species really relies on coordinated work across a large landscape. We cannot just implement actions, here and here and here in isolation of each other and hope that that's going to support the species. We really need to look at that whole landscape scale. And so that's what we've been doing. This infographic here, again, don't hone in on all the details, but just the dots are all those areas where we're currently working. But it did not start like this. We started back in 2017, 2018, initiating those local partnerships in primarily southeastern Arizona, and the Tucson area was our main launching point for our initial pilot projects. And from those pilot projects, we have developed kind of best management or best practices for not only doing agave restoration and how do you grow agaves, how do you plant them so they survive. We've developed all those techniques with our local partners, like our local nursery partners, for example. And we've also developed best practices for engagement with local communities. How best do you engage with the very, very diverse stakeholders that this kind of work entails. And one of the things that we've kind of initially built those partnerships, that partnership base, was by integrating with trusted local partners. So, we don't just go into an area cold and say, hey, we're, BCI's here, we want to protect bats. Like, that's not going to work. What we do, and I'm sure most folks know this, is that you find people who are already working locally, who already have those established relationships, already have that community reputation, and integrate your work into their work and their goals, of course, so that both of your kind of missions are met. And that's how we started with these handful of local organizations and groups in Arizona, by really allowing us to build that trust with the local communities. So, we started there, and then since then, we realized, of course, that this conservation issue requires coordinated action across that large scale. So we've been working to develop these regional restoration networks, and I put networks in quotes because they're not necessarily all formalized networks with like a charter and steering committee. They're at kind of varying levels of formalization, based on the need for formalization or the need not to formalize. But the idea is that these groups of stakeholders from each region can then tailor actions that are appropriate to their areas. And that's, kind of the crux of that matter is each area where we work across this binational corridor is different. There's different social contexts, economic contexts. The bats, sometimes they're different species. So we really need to think about what is appropriate to do at each of those areas. And that's what those regional networks can allow us to do, is set those strategies that are appropriate for those areas. Those networks also allow us to avoid duplication of efforts and connect local partners to each other. That's something that we have found extremely beneficial, is that when we bring these stakeholders together, some of them have never met each other. They don't know the work that they're each doing. And sometimes they find overlap between their work, which can lead to synergies and potential, collaborations. And it helps us avoid duplicating our efforts, having the same actions happening, but by different groups. That has happened in some of the communities, and they get confused about why are these different groups coming with the same kind of project in different areas. So that's a perk of this kind of network approach. And then again, developing goals that would not be achievable through isolated projects. We can think bigger. We can think ambitious, large scale with these networks to help us get there. So some of those key factors of our success and recommendations, I want to dig into, what have we found and what are some of those practical recommendations that might be useful for others. So like John mentioned, our approach is human well-being is a foundational strategy for achieving biodiversity outcomes. And these human well-being aspects are integral to the work. They're not some tangential benefit that just happens to develop from the work. They are absolutely foundational to achieving bat conservation and are, of course, important on their own right. And so I wanted to show this. This is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 SDGs. And the Agave Restoration Initiative contributes to 15 of those 17 SDGs. And you can see here life on land, which is the kind of biodiversity, bat conservation one, is one. But the benefits are actually more on the social and economic side of the work. So this is a core kind of framing, is it's not just about the bats, it's also about the people. In terms of recommendations, when we come to thinking about this work, some of the things that we've really honed in on is making sure that we're supporting local needs, whether those needs are directly related to, protecting these bats or like planting agaves, they're not necessarily always directly related. So for example, supporting community sustainable businesses. This is a group a women's group in one of the protected area ejidos in Mexico that is near one of the nectar bat roosts. And these women, you can see their personal care products. They make shampoos and soaps and products to sell in local markets from the herbs, from the plants that they harvest from the wild, native plant populations. And they're doing that in a sustainable manner to support those native plant populations. So their work is supporting not only the habitat for the agaves, but it's also supporting their income so that they are better able to participate in agave restoration, for example. And some of these women grow agaves in nurseries that they've built at their houses. They have little baby agaves growing because they've been supported through the work of supporting their businesses. So sometimes it might seem tangential to bat conservation, like why are we supporting them making shampoos? But it really provides that long-term incentive. Same kind of case for nurseries. So we help build and maintain community nurseries to not only grow agaves for restoration needs, but also the local communities can grow medicinal plants, they can grow vegetables, they can grow other plants that they can either consume or sell on local markets. And this is a greenhouse here in Coahuila in Mexico that they're producing chili piquin, which is a really important food plant for them locally. And they're also producing agaves. So again, it supports the people and the bats. And this approach of thinking beyond the bats really helps build trust. It shows that we as bat people, as the bat conservation partner, are interested in more than just bats, and we're there for long-term impact. And like I mentioned, this kind of support helps build and establish those long-term social and economic conditions needed for long-term bat conservation success. So it's all part of the package. And then related to this idea of bats not having to be the star, your motivation does not have to be your partner's motivation. So what I mean by this is, of course, our motivation, BCIs, is the bats, right? That's what we do. We're bat conservation people. That's what we're there for. But agaves can be made into products. So some of the people who participate and who are partners in this work might not care at all about the bats. They might just want healthy agave populations so that they can produce their liquor, their agave spirits. Or they might be ranchers who have cattle and they want to maintain healthy agave populations so that the cattle, like here, can feed on the agaves, especially in times of drought. Or they might be a landowner in Mexico or the US who is interested in planting agaves for land restoration to get tax breaks, like in the US, as part of tax programs. And they might not know anything about these nectar bats or really care. And that's fine. Of course, as BCI, we try our hardest to share about the bats, and we do a lot of education and outreach, and that is part of our work. But we recognize that it's not the motivating factor for many people. And so kind of that recommendation is find the hook that resonates with your partners, and that hook will be different for the different people you're working with. This is something that can be challenging to identify, but this comes from conversations with people. It comes from working with local NGO partners, for example, who already know the communities and their motivations. It comes from trust building. So this is something to keep in mind, that you don't have to be, in our example, bat forward. You can be agave forward and still achieve your outcomes that you want. A key factor, of course, in this binational landscape scale initiative is building and sustaining multi-sectoral trust-based partnerships. Now that's a big order. It's a very tall order to achieve. So how have we done that? What are some of the recommendations we've found useful? So kind of at the beginning of the initiative in each of the regions where we're working, we gather local stakeholders and have meetings. These are in-person meetings that bring together the community members, the ranchers, the NGOs, the government, etc. And we include diverse voices, right? This is not just about one sector. It's making sure that we can be as inclusive as possible. Of course, there's always room to be more inclusive, but that's something I would love to chat more about in the discussion. This bringing together of stakeholders allows for co-development of those goals and actions that advance both bat conservation goals and local livelihood goals. So again, bats and people. And a very kind of nitty-gritty tip that we've found useful is when you have these in-person meetings or Zoom meetings, offering translation services when you have these language barriers. I gave an example of Kudo. It's the platform we use for our Zoom meetings that provides simultaneous translations. This is very beneficial. And then there's ways when you're in person, you have headsets that you can provide in-person live translation. Costs money, so that's always a challenge. But if there's ways to get funding for that, we're happy to share how we've supported that. And I wanted to share an example of how we've kind of morphed this kind of trust-based partnership development through our Northeast Mexico Agave Restoration Network. So this network kind of unofficially formed in 2019 when we had our first network meeting with about 20 participants who were mostly bat and agave experts. These were researchers and staff from BCI who knew these bats and were working, you can see our map here, working to prioritize areas for bat conservation. So for nectar bat conservation, it was very bat focused. Move forward 3 years, we hosted our second network meeting where we more formalized this network approach, and we had much more diverse voices in this meeting. We had over 60 participants from many of them, actually most of them were ejido members and private landowners. We had NGOs, government agencies, and local industry members, as well as those bat and agave experts. So this time we were much more inclusive, and we were also focusing much more on those co-benefits of the work, not just bat priorities, but how can we sustain agave populations for bats and for people? So that's kind of just an example of how we've done this. And then in terms of partnership building, trust building, I cannot stress enough the importance of regular visits with partners, with landowners. These don't have to be like formal meetings, they can be, but making sure you're doing those regular visits over an extended period of time. One of the things that we've heard from our community partners in Mexico is that pretty much all the other NGOs that they've worked with in the past would come once, or they'd have like a 1-year project, and they'd maybe come twice, and then they'd leave, and that was it. So we've been intentional in making sure that our commitments are long-term, multi-year, as well as regular visits. And we do this through not only BCI staff, but also hiring local liaisons who we know and trust, who can work with those communities and already are, in many cases, are working with those communities. And they can be that liaison if we can't get down there directly each time. And these kind of informal connections allow for more of those kind of personal relationship building. I love this picture from Nuevo León, where the landowners at the cave for the Mexican long-nosed bat, they're one of our key partners, and they've known this NGO, Species Sociedad y Habitat, for probably a decade now. And they have that relationship built because of those frequent visits. And then in terms of building and maintaining those partnerships, maintaining that momentum, we have found very useful to have these communication mechanisms. We provide a newsletter for the Northeast Mexico work. We have not been as good as keeping up with that as we would like to have been, but we do have that we've done a few times, and then a WhatsApp group that community members, everyone has WhatsApp in Mexico, and people can share photos, they can share successes or memes or whatever they want on this WhatsApp group. And it's just a way to maintain that connection when we all can't be together in person. Another key factor that we have found very helpful in establishing local partnership is these support of local champions, as we like to call them. These local champions are people who are really passionate for whatever reason. They're passionate about this work. They either love bats, or they really are passionate about ecosystem health, and they want to maintain agaves. There's different motivations for these people, but we've found that providing them opportunities to share about the work or to lead local field efforts, for example, are ways that really excite them and that get them involved. This picture here is from our Texas agave work, and this guy right here, Lindsay, he is a Texas master naturalist, and he has been super gung-ho about this work. He just loves these bats. And so he's been giving public talks about these bats and agaves, about the work we're doing. He's been helping collect eDNA, environmental DNA samples, which I'll talk about later, but really helps champion this work locally. And then along those lines, we have worked to establish kind of these train the trainers or train the teachers programs that have been really helpful for integrating bat conservation topics and agave topics into local K-12 schools, particularly in Mexico. So this group here is a teacher group from some of the rural communities. And our NGO partners provide trainings on how to teach about bats and how to teach about, the conservation of these nectar bats to the teachers, and then they can teach their students. So they incorporate those lessons into their plans each year, which is a really cool way to kind of institutionalize this work on a larger scale. Tapping into local enthusiasm for their resources. These people in the communities, they're owners, they're the stewards of these roosts, these bats, as well as the agaves. And so we've been working to establish community citizen science initiatives to help monitor these bats, and it expands our capacity to be able to do this monitoring, and it provides tangible ways for people to get involved and enhances local support. And one cool success story from this, BCI has developed an eDNA, or environmental DNA methodology, for detecting nectar bats from agave flowers and hummingbird feeders. We've deployed that across the Southwest US and parts of Mexico, and worked with local community scientists to collect swabs from from hummingbird feeders. And that citizen science sampling has led to the first discovery of the endangered Mexican long-nosed bat in Arizona, which now makes this species the first endangered bat species in Arizona. So it's a really cool success story of how local participation and efforts can lead to these really cool discoveries. And fostering a sense of belonging and shared purpose. This is something that we work to bring people together. So bring people from communities, from native plant nurseries together to share their experiences. So BCI supports financially and through hosting these exchange of experience trips. For example, this rancher group to talk about regenerative agriculture and agave restoration, where these participants can share their ideas, share challenges and lessons learned. And I love these quotes about these experiences. That this one participant, "This has gone beyond my expectations, seeing all the different stakeholders and different actions." And then I love this one. "We have realized that each one of us is joined with the same thread." So it really, these opportunities really foster that sense of belonging and shared purpose. A very small idea, but something that people love to foster the sense of belonging is providing tokens. I didn't know what to call it, but tokens of involvement. So stickers, hats, t-shirts, framed photos of the, people in the field, certificates of participation, particularly in Mexico and in the US. People love stickers like to put on their phone. So this is a very small thing that you can do, but something that we've found a lot of success in. Speaking of success, celebrating success is very important. There's a lot of challenges with this work, but when we celebrate success, we share success and we can create that enthusiasm and momentum. So we, just like those exchange of experience trips, we host parties or get-togethers or meals with the communities where people have an informal opportunity to build relationships and to get to know each other. This is one of our fiestas in the Sierra La Mojonera in Mexico, where the communities that were all participating in the Agave initiative celebrated their 1-year anniversary of their participation. And they all got together and had this big celebration and dance, and it was really cool. And so, yeah, again, WhatsApp groups are similar to help foster that long-term communication. Now, moving a little away from like the community focus, but thinking about how do we move forward as as planning and as groups that work together, especially organizational partners. BCI has been part of several leadership or catalyst programs that can accelerate impact. And I wanted to share these three in case they are of interest to other folks on the call. BCI, as well as 3 of our Northeast Mexico NGO partners, participated in the Peregrine Accelerator for Conservation Impact from the Salazar Center. Every year or a couple years, they have this program to bring together people working on regional efforts. And it's an accelerator program to help you as a group define your project and move forward your project even further. So check that out. Same thing with the Center for Collaborative Conservation. They have a fellows program that BCI and our Northeast Mexico partners participated in, as well as the International Land Conservation Network had their ILCN Academy that BCI staff participated in to learn more about large landscape scale conservation. So definitely check these out if you're interested in these types of programs. Now, thinking long-term, thinking bigger picture, some of the key factors of this work is focusing on creating long-term conditions for success. So in our case with agave restoration, we've really been thinking more recently about creating the underlying biophysical conditions needed for successful agave restoration. So this is thinking about things like restoring native grasses that are necessary for agave seedling recruitment and survival. So again, this goes beyond planting agaves and thinking, how do we ensure that there's healthy nurse plants, healthy soils to maintain these agaves? And also along those lines, we're working particularly in the US to establish best management practices for livestock management and grazing in agave habitat. Because unfortunately, livestock are one of the historic impacts, the biggest historical impacts on agave populations in both countries. So we're working with ranchers to figure out how can we implement ranching practices that support agave habitat, healthy soils for the bats and for the livestock. And then again, thinking, how do we frame this long-term for long-term success? We're working particularly in the US to integrate agave restoration into broader programs like federal programs, as well as institutionalized agave restoration. So this is some of those tax programs, tax exemption programs I mentioned, making sure that agave plantings count towards those management practices that landowners can use to get tax incentives. So we're working on that, particularly in Texas. And then federal lands, framing our agave restoration work within reference plant communities. This is how the federal land management system works. If you don't know the reference plant communities in your areas where you're working and how your restoration work enhances that plant community, you're not going to get buy-in for the work. So we're working to integrate agaves into those frameworks. And then just a few last things in terms of bigger picture. So framing your conservation work in ways that resonate with different audiences, I caveat that. But for example, for funders, I've been seeing a lot of funders thinking about theories of change and wanting to see grantees have a theory of change. And so this is one of the theories of change that we've developed and published, and I have the QR code here to the document that has this if anyone is interested. But yeah, making sure you're creating a theory of change for how your work is contributing to biodiversity and/or human well-being outcomes long term. Same thing with showcasing how your work is relevant to and contributes to global sustainability targets like the SDGs or the 30 by 30 targets. If you can illustrate how your work is advancing those goals, it positions you in a better position for some of these larger funding sources or multilateral funding if you're thinking bigger picture like that. And again, just some example of how we've done this, and with a QR code can take you to that. And I'm wrapping up. I want to make sure we have time for questions. But one of the things we've also found extremely beneficial is impactful storytelling and having high quality media assets. Things like infographics, videos, high quality photos. A picture can say 1,000 words. So if you're able to get these assets, it costs money, of course, but if you're able to secure funding to get these assets, you can leverage those for funding applications, for showcasing to the public, for using in talks. It's very helpful to have these assets. These are some of the videos clips we've created, and please check out our Bats and Agave YouTube playlist. We have a handful of really beautiful videos that highlight the work of our local partners. And whenever possible, creating those online platforms to showcase those media assets. We have our We Belong Together website that shares the story of bats and agaves and people. So whenever possible, showcasing this work to the public has been very beneficial in garnering support. And then last slide before I end, in terms of challenges, I would love to hear your thoughts. Some of the things we've been challenged with is overcoming barriers like access to technology or limited ability to travel for some of our community partners. How do we overcome that? I'd love thoughts if anyone works in those remote areas or with people who might not have access to this technology, like Zoom. Support for non-US networks. The work we're doing in Mexico has been supported primarily through private foundations. So thank you to those foundations who are supporting the work. But a lot of the work that I've seen in terms of funding is focused for US. So any ideas of how to support non-US based networks would be greatly appreciated. And then finally, how to most effectively tap into the global sustainability funding that's out there. BCI is in a very unique position. We're kind of a mid-level NGO. We're not a small scale local in-country, like in Mexico, NGO, so we can't apply to some of the grant opportunities that local NGOs can apply to, but we're also not the WCSs or the WWFs that get multi-million-dollar investments, we're kind of in that middle zone. So if anyone has ideas of how to tap into those larger funding pools, we'd love to have that conversation. And then finally, I just want to end by recognizing the partners, the amazing hundreds of people who are working on this initiative. This is an all hands on deck effort. We wouldn't be able to do this work without all of our local partners. So these are just some of the smiling faces that are part of the initiative. And I always like to end on this quote because it really hits the nail on the head. For us, the agave is so noble that it gives us life. And with that, I want to end and make sure we have time for some questions and discussion. So feel free to check out our websites and our social media. And yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. Just such a fantastic presentation to sit
Thank
through, and
you.
so many threads there that just resonate really deeply, and such a great set of reflections for all of us to carry forward into our work. And so yeah, absolutely welcome folks to jump in with questions and thoughts in the chat as we take the next 8 or 9 minutes just to create some space for hearing from all of you. And yeah, Kristen, maybe I'll just take the prerogative as moderator and throw you a question to get started. But I so resonated on your reflections that the local context really matters, and there's differing degrees of formality needed for differing networks, and sort of the nested nature of that and how
Yep.
that plays out over time. And I think so much of what you're speaking to is this notion that gets encapsulated really poetically in the concept that this work moves at the speed of trust.
Yes.
It's so easy to say that, and then also really hard to do that in reality.
Yeah.
And you were speaking to that in many ways already.
Mhm.
But I was really struck by how much intentionality you all seemingly bring to that notion of creating a sense of belonging
Mhm.
and really fostering trust, and making sure you have those moments for,
Mhm.
I don't know, longitudinal connection, those
Yeah.
connections over time that allows for
Yeah.
the development of relationship and connection that extends beyond project specific work. And so
Yeah.
I don't know if you have any reflections on how to think about and how to go about building sort of
Mhm.
network culture
Yeah.
in that space over
Yeah.
time and over a large geography too. I'm
Mhm.
struck by the scale at which you're working. So anyway, I'm
Yeah.
rambling a little bit, but just curious to hear any reflections on sort of what you've drawn out from your work over the years around sort of
Mhm.
intentionally cultivating network culture and thinking about
Mhm.
the experience people have when they plug into this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've learned a lot along the way. That this is not something we had the developed 100% at the beginning, right? This is things we've learned. And yeah, I think one of the main kind of threads is integrating with local partners who are already working in these areas and with the communities and landowners. Um, I mean, that's it, except for, I mean, pretty much everywhere in every state we're working, that's how we're approaching this. Because if we come in as, Bat Conservation International, people look at you very funny, like, why are you here? And it takes a lot longer versus integrating with the local NGOs, for example, that already have that trust built. So I think that's step one. And then one of the other things that we have found useful from our staff perspective here at BCI is having BCI staff who are based, I don't know, near-ish to those areas where we're working. So I wish my two counterparts could be here. Ana Ibarra is our basically agave restoration lead for Mexico. And then Rachel Burke is our coordinator for US agave work. Anna's in Mexico and Rachel's in New Mexico. So they're both able to travel pretty easily to go visit the communities, go visit a landowner. If a landowner calls them up, they can be there the next day potentially. So having those local people on staff or contracted out as liaisons is invaluable because that it shows that we're investing in the work on a personal level, and it also helps get things done faster and builds that relationship.
Yeah, thanks so
Yep.
much, Kristen.
Mhm.
I maybe just a quick follow-up on that too. That work takes time.
Oh yeah.
And the other thing I love your reflection, like the bat doesn't need to be the star, and
Yeah. It's
the
hard. It's hard to let that go
yeah, no,
sometimes.
yeah, right. I love
Yeah.
that you as bat the
Yeah.
conservation will share that.
Mhm.
But but I'm also reflecting on the reality that in the work that we're doing,
Mhm.
so much of where funding sources come from is sort of really concrete, specific
Yeah.
outcomes and metrics. And so how do you balance and how do you
Yeah.
talk about your work when you're connecting with funders
Yep.
around the need to invest in relationship and time to cultivate those
Mhm.
connections, and also the
Yeah.
recognition that this work is multifaceted and
Mhm.
there's a suite of outcomes that are all interconnected and interdependent and
Mhm.
all mutually
Yeah. Subject
reinforcing.
to change,
Yeah.
right?
So
Yeah.
how do you just thoughts
Yep.
on connecting and bringing funders along with the understanding that this is
Mhm.
long-term work that takes time, but does over
Yep.
over time give the outcomes that they may be
Yeah.
interested in.
So I will say we have been extremely lucky to have funders who recognize that need for not only multi-year commitments. That's something that in the past, a lot of grants were 1 year, um, which was very difficult for work like this.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing a shift in funding, particularly in the private foundation sphere, multi-year, and also less tied to specific metrics ahead of time. Does that make sense? And like more supporting the vision and the momentum. And so because we've had a handful of those grants, for example, we've been able to have that flexibility, which I know not every organization has. But yeah, definitely in terms of how to do that, establishing relationships with your funders through, just like with the communities and NGOs, with partner visits. So we've had funders come out to our agave restoration sites and like actually plant agaves with us. We have regular Zoom calls, check-ins with some of the funders. Um, Sometimes we text pictures. If we have a good enough relationship, we'll just text pictures from the field to some of our funders. That's part of just relationship maintaining and building that personal connection. So and I think more organizations and more funders are realizing the need for that relationship-based funding and long-term funding.
Yeah, I feel like that's an important space for us collectively as a community
Yeah.
of practice to continue to
Hmm.
draw attention to
Yeah.
and push on. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
And
Go ahead. Sorry.
I just had one more thing. In terms of that flexibility, like we have had instances where some of the things we said in our grant application was not going to happen. We realized, partway through the year of the funding that it wasn't going to happen at all, or wasn't going to happen within the time frame of that 1 year grant. And so just being open with your funders, I don't think we've ever had an instance with our agave funders where they've been like, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to meet your deliverable. Like, never can we fund you again." We've never had that. I think just being open and transparent about why you're having those issues, potentially they might be able to help provide some insight into how you could fix the situation. But we've always been very fortunate to have those good relationships.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's great to hear.
yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the time, and I know we're at the top of the hour. There is a note in the Q&A, Kristen, around
Mhm.
someone interested in looking for advice around heading into the international wildlife connectivity work as a career, and that feels like
Yeah.
maybe more appropriate as a direct follow-up. And I know you shared your contact information earlier, and so if that
Yes.
individual is still on the call, maybe a direct follow-up to you, Kristen, might be warranted.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Kristen, let me just thank you on behalf of NLC and all of us for carving out time and just a really fantastic presentation and just some really powerful insights that you've pulled out, and feels like a real gift to the community of practice to have
Thank you.
some of that thinking elevated, and some pathways to continue to reflect on and explore. So
Thank you.
thank you so
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. And I'm happy to share the, slides after and links to the things I shared. So
much.
happy to do that.
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome.
This was a pleasure, and seeing some affirmation from the chat as well. So, Kristen, thank you so much, and everyone, thank you for joining. And we always look forward to having a chance to connect with you all. So, I hope everyone stays well, and we'll be in touch soon with more opportunities to plug into these conversations. So, thanks again, Kristen. Wonderful
Awesome.
to have you.
Yep.
Thank you. Take
Thank
care.
you, everyone. Bye, everyone.
Bye.